Antichrist. Unmasking the Antichrist. Who is he? Is he alive today? How many of you think the Antichrist is alive today? How many are like, he's definitely alive today? How many of you think he's going to be, he's not alive, but he's going to be resurrected? Oh, there's a handful of you out there. Some of you are like, I never heard that one. You'll hear more about that in a little bit. Through the ages, there have been thousands of people that have been pointed out as Antichrist. On the screen, you got a few that have come up of late. Now, what's funny is they're all doing this. Well, or this, or this, or... So we got Obama, we've got Putin, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, he was 666 because there's 6 letters in Ronald Wilson Reagan, and so they were certain he was the Antichrist. The next guy, who's that guy to his right? Do you know who that is? I'm in a jihad. I'm in a jihad. Now, actually, his name is Ahmadinejad, but you can remember it by saying, I'm in a jihad. He was the former president of Iran that wanted the destruction of Israel. We're going to talk about him in a moment. Above him, who's that? Henry Kissinger. And then, I don't know who that guy is. Now, are you clapping for him because you think he's the Antichrist or because... Some people think he is. Okay, next to him, of course, is Gorbachev, who has that birthmark, the wound that was healed, and Hitler, Napoleon, and practically every pope has been... We got a rowdy crowd. All right. So, are any of these guys the Antichrist? No. Yes. No. Maybe so. Absolutely not. What does Jesus have to say? Since he is the Christ, he does point to and talk about Antichrist. Not using the word Antichrist, using the word the coming world leader. We have in Matthew 24, he kicks it off on his last week with his disciples before he was crucified. It says, Matthew 24, verse 1, Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? The disciples, they'd been at the temple, and they're like, Jesus, just look at this temple. Isn't this temple amazing? They'd spent over 40 years building the temple. And Jesus is like, it's going to be destroyed. Not one stone is going to be left. And you could just see the disciples, they got to pick their jaws up off the ground. And they're like, whoa. And they're with a bunch of people, so they're like, we're not going to ask him yet. So as they go to the Mount of Olives later that day, they're like, Jesus, when's this going to happen? When's this going to happen? If the disciples saw our day, they'd be like, Jesus says and answers them in verse 4. Jesus answered them and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. He's setting it up, and he's basically saying, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be people that say that they're Christ, but they're coming to deceive. He doesn't use the term Antichrist. That's actually a term used by John in a couple other places. But here he's saying they're coming to deceive you. You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. Are we hearing any rumors of wars right now? Yes. Whew. We live in crazy times. We live at a time, during the Cold War, there were 2 superpowers, us and the USSR, right? The Soviet Union. And it was just the 2 of us, and there was this parity of nuclear power, and this idea that, nobody would, in their right mind, would use nuclear weapons because the other one would just destroy each other and the planet would be annihilated. But today, as we are scaling back our nuclear weapons, Russia is re-energizing theirs. They've got 70% of theirs reformatted and re-energized, so to speak. We've been saying, well, we don't think nuclear weapons are really, we don't want the world to have nuclear weapons, so we're going to lead by getting rid of ours. China, meanwhile, is saying, by 2030, we're going to be ahead of you all. Already, they're ahead of us in conventional weapons. And so there's even talk now that, of course, we are three superpowers, if you will, but there's talk now that if there was an invasion of, say, Taiwan or Ukraine, that we might not even bother with conventional weapons. That there's somebody that might say, well, we'll just do a little nuke to kind of wake them up and say, don't do that. Now, that's kind of crazy. And of course, the world is here kind of biting their nails about Ukraine. But meanwhile, if you've been watching Taiwan, China's like just waiting for the Olympics to get over. Because they can't do anything before the Olympics. We got wars and rumors of wars. Oh, and did I mention that those are just three superpowers, but there's a dozen nations that have nuclear weapons. And some of them, all it takes is one strategically placed to do a knockout blow through EMP and other things. Oh, we live in exciting times. Jesus continues in this chapter, Matthew 24, and skipping to verse 15, he says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. This is a strange little thing that Jesus, he's going through, and he actually, we don't have time to go into it today, but he's actually paralleling these end time signs with Revelation 6. When you get a chance and you compare Matthew 24 and Revelation 6, the seven seals, they all line up perfectly in the order that they happen. And he's saying these things are going to happen, and then you're going to see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. In other words, the temple is going to be rebuilt, and there's going to be this desecration of the temple. He says the temple that you see now is going to be destroyed, but then there's going to be another temple that's going to be rebuilt, and then there's going to be this thing that desecrates the temple. When you see that, run. That's what he says. We'll talk about it. All right, so why do I mention this? Well, because we're going through the series on Daniel, right? In Daniel, a light in the darkness, a light in today's darkness. The chapter a couple weeks ago, we were in Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 7 was the image of four beasts, or the pictures of four beasts or four kingdoms that paralleled the four kingdoms that we had from Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And if you remember, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, chapter 2, we had gold, silver, bronze, and then iron mixed with clay, and those corresponded to four kingdoms: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greek, and then the Islamic Caliphate. Some people think Rome, but Islamic Caliphate fits everything a little bit better, especially when we get to the iron mixed with clay. Chapter 7 then is looking at it from God's perspective, and instead of as a pretty picture of pretty metals, there are four beasts and there are four characters. The Babylon appears as a lion, Medo-Persia as a bear, Greece as a leopard, and then the fourth beast, a terrible beast with iron teeth, 10 horns, and a little horn. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. That was really a part 1 on the Antichrist, that little horn that kind of came up amidst the 10 and became the prominent one, the most important one. So as we go into Daniel chapter 8, he's basically going to focus in on the two middle kingdoms here, Medo-Persia and Greece, and show us some fascinating things that lead to the Antichrist. So we pick it up at Daniel 8, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. Remember, Daniel's chapter 7 through 12 are 4 different visions. The first vision was the beasts. This one is another vision. It's a couple years later, King Belshazzar, and he says, it appeared to me, after the first one appeared to me. I saw in the vision, verse 2, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, or Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Now, you're like, okay, what is all this about? Well, Daniel is in Babylon. He is, in his vision, he's transported to Susa. Susa at this time is about 200 miles away. It's just a little wide spot in the road, okay? But it's going to become the capital of the Persian Empire. Now, when you hear the word Persian, think Iran, okay? Because that's what we're talking about. It's going to become the capital of the Persian Empire, which is the next empire to happen. So God transports him there. In verse 3, he says, "Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him. Nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will and became great." Okay, so we see this ram. He's got 2 horns, and one's higher than the other. We find out later in the passage, Gabriel's going to interpret for us and tell us that the 2 horns are representing the Medo and Persian Empire. The Medes were the first kingdom, and they became allied with the Persian Empire, which were much greater. They were the higher horn, if you will. Remember from 2 weeks ago, we also had the bear, and one side was higher than the other. So it's focusing in here, giving us a little bit more detail. And the ram was pushing westward, northward, and southward. No one could stand before it, and none could be delivered from its hand. They did what they wanted to do. Verse 5, "And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west." Now, the ram is bigger than the goat, right? But the goat came across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a noble horn between its eyes. Basically, he's moving so fast, it's like he's flying. If you remember from 2 weeks ago, that it was like a leopard and it had wings, right? So here it has a horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had been standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Basically, the goat wins. We know the goat, speaking of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, basically with 35,000 men, took down a 250,000 man army. It was huge. It was a huge victory. And we looked at a couple weeks ago how that was really God's design, God's purpose. God's the one that gets the credit, although Alexander took the credit. None could stand against him. Now, verse 8, "Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in its place 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven." This is all predictive prophecy, okay? It's a couple hundred years before it happens. But basically it's saying the horn becomes great, and then it's basically tips over, broken off. Alexander dies at like 32 years old, really young. Dies basically of alcoholism and depression, and because there were no other kingdoms to win. That's what his whole focus was on. And so in his place, it says 4 notable ones come. Well, his kingdom gets divided between his 4 generals. And it says to the 4 winds of the heavens, basically north, south, east, and west. The 2 that we're going to focus on are the northern kingdom, which is the Seleucid or Syrian Empire, and the southern, which is the Ptolemy or Egyptian Empire. Those become the 2 that begin warring, and that we're going to talk about here in this next section. So verse 9, "And out of the one of them came a little horn," same word as the last chapter, "little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered." Now you're like, this is kind of weird once again. Daniel, you're like, did you eat the wrong pizza? What's going on with your mind here in terms of all these things you're seeing? It's strange. And then he sees this horn, this little horn that is taking control over everything, and it goes up to heaven and brings down the stars. What is all this talking about? Now, in the Bible, usually the stars are references to one of 2 people, either the angels or sometimes the holy ones. Holy ones could be the saints. Now it says that they get trampled, and he's pulling down the stars. In other words, there's some element of him bringing down angelic hosts. This is some character. This is like some strange character. This seems like more than a man in some ways, doesn't it? And this is what we're talking about. The amazing thing about God's word is that he often has a near-term and a far-term fulfillment. There's like a telescoping. If you've ever been in the mountains, as you see them from a distance, they just look like one long range, right? But as you get closer, you realize that there's two here. What looked like one, as you get closer, becomes two, and one is further away than the other. And the same thing is happening here with this prophecy. There's going to be an immediate fulfillment, and then there's going to be a farther future, our day, I believe, fulfillment. And that's what's going on here. That's what he's speaking of. What's fascinating is there was this guy named Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, who fulfills this. Basically, this is who Daniel was speaking of. This guy, he becomes he's Greek in the sense of he speaks Greek, but he's from Syria, okay? And he becomes an Antichrist figure, and a type of Antichrist, a picture of Antichrist. The book of Maccabees is really kind of a history book. We don't include it in the Bible. It's part of the Apocrypha, but it tells of some of the things that were happening at that time. And it's speaking of this time about this guy, the king. Speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, he wrote unto his whole kingdom that all should be one people. This is to the Jews. He's writing to the Jews. Hey, you guys, we should all be united. We should all come together. It's kind of interesting. And that everyone should give up his religious usages. And all the nations acquiesced in accordance with the command of the king. And many in Israel took delight in his form of worship. And they began sacrificing to idols and profaned the Sabbath. What's going on is this guy comes in and says, hey, we just need to come together. We need to be one family, one nation under many gods. It's okay if you believe your God and I'll be my God, and we all come together. And this was his focus. And some of the Israelites were like, you know what? Yeah, it's okay. We'll play along to get along and go along. Verse 44. Furthermore, the king sent letters by hands of the messengers to Jerusalem and to cities of Judah to the effect that they should practice customs foreign to the traditions of the land, and that they should cease the sacrificing of whole burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and feasts and pollute the sanctuary and those who had been sacrificed, that they should moreover build high places, sacred groves, and shrines for idols, that they should sacrifice swine, pigs, and other unclean animals. Basically, he's moving all this pagan stuff into Israel. And some in Israel are like, hey, you know what? It's the Greek culture. You know what? They have a lot of things going for them. We should think about it. We should think about it. You know, that's an interesting thought you have about, and you fill in the blank. Critical race theory. You fill in the blank, and all of a sudden you've just taking the times and the philosophies of men and beginning to embrace them and thinking that it's, well, you have some points there, right? Like some of that makes sense, right? And this is what they did. The Jews began to embrace some of this. There were Hellenistic Jews that basically said, we're going to embrace this Greek culture because they're the ones in charge, so it just makes sense. There were others that are like, no way, we're not going to do this at all. One of them was a guy by the name of Maccabee, and Matthias Maccabee, and he basically said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this, and he basically got killed because of it. His son, Judas Maccabeus, was the one that led the revolt against all this pagan worship. Here's what goes on. This guy, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, that name means Antiochus, God manifest. He was calling himself God. He actually, I have a picture, he minted coins that said, Theos Antiochus, Theos Epiphanes. God, basically calling himself God. And he, of course, this was the coins of the day. He forbade the Sabbath. He outlawed the Torah. He forbade circumcision. In fact, what he did, when there were some mothers that said, I don't care what the government says, we're still going to do it. And when he found out, he had the babies killed, wrapped around the mothers' necks, and the mothers marched through Jerusalem and then thrown off the Temple Mount. Antiochus was demonic, was evil. And he called himself God. Daniel 8, verse 10, and it grew up to the host of heaven and cast down some of the host and some of the stars of the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. The prince of the host, speaking of Jesus. So in other words, he's exalted himself above, as high as Jesus. Of course, Jesus hadn't been born yet, but the idea of he's exalted himself higher than that. Antiochus, the great God manifest. And verse 11, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Antiochus comes down and basically stops the sacrifices. He says, enough of this animal sacrifice. He goes in and he sacrifices a pig on the altar. Now you have to understand, the only person that was supposed to go in and sacrifice were the priests. And here's Antiochus, a Gentile, coming in, and he's making a sacrifice, so he shouldn't be there at all, number one. Number two, he's sacrificing a pig, which is not kosher. In fact, it's the epitome of thumbing your nose in the face of God. This is what this Antichrist character is doing. This is what he does. He is the little horn. This is the abomination of desolation. What he does there is sacrificing the pig on the altar in the temple of God was the abomination of desolation. Daniel actually speaks about it a couple chapters later, Daniel 11, verse 30. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. In other words, for those who turn against Israel, he's going to cheer them on. In verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. This is what Jesus was referring to. This is what he's saying. When you see the abomination of desolation, then it's time. Now, if it wasn't enough, he not only sacrificed a pig, he also then put in the temple an image of Zeus. Zeus was the high god in the Greek pantheon. And so it was like, as if it wasn't enough to do the pig, he had to do Zeus, okay? This is the part of the reason that the Jews, instead of calling him Antiochus Epiphanes, they called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means Antiochus the madman. Verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking. Another holy one said, that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. That cleansing of the sanctuary was basically, there was a rebellion that happens with Judas Maccabeus, and they were able to kind of force Antiochus out of the land. They don't actually kill him. He dies. It's fascinating. He dies of like this disease where he's rotting away and he stinks, and then he goes insane. Interesting for an Antichrist character. It's a good way for him to die, I think. Appropriate. He was already insane, but when of course they've cleansed it, they finally get control of the temple again, and then they realize they only have one little vial of oil. They need 8 days worth. They just say, well, God, we're going to just do it. We're going to start to cleanse the temple and just trust you anyway. And the oil lasted for 8 days. The result is a festival that we call Hanukkah. All right? That's where Hanukkah came from. The cleansing of the temple after that pig and Zeus and all of that. Now, the fascinating thing is, from the time that Antiochus came to power until the cleansing of the temple was 2,300 days, just as the Bible said, just as the Bible predicted. Who would have thought? The question is, does that 2,300 days apply to today? Is there something here? Is there a near-term and a far-term fulfillment that might apply to today? Remember that the Bible said, Jesus said that there's going to be a temple in the last days. In fact, Daniel 9, the chapter that we'll get to next week, Daniel 9:27, then he, the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. The week, remember, is it's really a word for 7. It doesn't necessarily mean a week of days. It could be a week of years, which is what we believe. But in the middle of the week, or the 7, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolate. Now, you read all that, and it's like, what exactly is that saying? Basically, there's going to be a 7-year treaty. In the middle of the treaty, the temple will have been built at some point, but in the middle of the treaty, he's going to come in, and it says that he is going to do the abomination of desolation. He will end the sacrifice and the wing of abominations which makes desolation, or the abomination that brings desolation. That's what's going to happen. So you have this thing, this prophecy fulfillment again, not speaking of Antiochus Day. This looks to the future day, to our day. There's going to be an Antichrist figure that somehow is going to confirm a treaty in Israel to allow the temple to be rebuilt. Now, if you know what's going on with the Temple Mount is one of the most sacred areas for both Jews and Muslims. And who controls the Temple Mount? Muslims. What's on the Temple Mount? The Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Dome of the Rock apparently is where, what's his name? Muhammad basically took off and flew to heaven. And so for that reason, it is considered the third holiest site in Islam. And for that reason, the Jews ain't going to be able to touch it. In fact, today, if you're Jewish, you're only allowed up on the Temple Mount for very short stints, and you basically have to have an armed guard with you. Because the Temple Mount, even though Israel controls the area, they allow, for peacekeeping relations, they allow the Muslims or the Jordanians, basically, to control the Temple Mount, and basically there's Muslims up there all day. And there's a whole group of women that just basically watch to make sure that nobody brings any Bibles, don't bring any crosses, don't bring anything up on the Temple Mount that is Christian or Jewish. You're not allowed, in fact, they tell you when you go up on the Temple Mount, you're not allowed to pray. You know what we did? Don't tell anybody, okay? But it's one of those cases where you're definitely praying with your eyes open, but you're praying. Because I mean, it's such a spooky, dark place. Because you walk up there and it's kind of quiet, and it's this big area. There's parks and there's all these different things going on. There's a lot of Muslims up there, and it's just there's this oppression because it's controlled by the powers of darkness. And the Jews, the belief is that where the Dome of the Rock was, or where the Dome of the Rock is where the temple used to be. Okay, as the ultimate abomination of desolation is that there is an abomination sitting there right now. That's what some believe. But the Bible, what I see here, we all see, the Antichrist is going to some covenant, temple is going to be rebuilt. We don't know where. It could actually be built to the north, or it could actually be built to the south. In either case, they could build it and not upset the other two buildings. I believe that an Antichrist character is going to do that. That's one of the things he's going to do. He's going to set up something and say, hey, can't we all just get along? And then what happens is when they say that, and especially if they don't have to move the Dome of the Rock, okay, they're not going to move. The Dome of the Rock's been there since the 7th century, okay? It's one of the oldest still standing buildings in Israel. It's amazing that sacrilege, that God would allow it to stay for so long. There's been many earthquakes, and that thing continues to stand. So, Daniel tells us, Paul also tells us, 2 Thessalonians 2, we looked at this a couple of weeks ago. This chapter, he tells us, now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, the rapture, and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means. In other words, they were thinking that they had missed the rapture. They were going through such difficult times that they're like, we must be in the tribulation. And so we must have missed the rapture. And he's like, no. Don't let anyone deceive you or trouble you, as if by spirit or word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed. The man of sin being the Antichrist, the son of perdition. Perdition, that same word, abomination. who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshiped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. That Antichrist character is going to put himself in the temple. We're going to see in Revelation 13 that he creates an image that goes in the temple of himself. Look at me. At that point, the world will know who the Antichrist is. Now, you may have been hoping that I was going to tell you who it is now. And we can't know. We can't know. We know from other passages, from Revelation 6, that the Antichrist is going to come on the scene. And we know that the passage that I just read, that there's going to be that treaty. And so the guy that signs that treaty, I'm going to be watching him. But the treaty is not necessarily the thing you're looking for. You're looking for that temple to be rebuilt. What's fascinating is right now, today, the Temple Mount Faithful and the Temple Institute are ready. They have everything ready. Our last trip to Israel, we went there and we went to the Temple Institute, and you can see all the things that they've created. They've got the ephod of the high priest. They've got it all made with the original colors and all the original jewels and everything. And they've got the altar of incense and the different implements. They've got everything's made. This candelabra, if you will, it's really the menorah, is like this tall. It's huge. Gold-plated, millions of dollars, okay? And what's amazing is it sits in the middle of the old city of Jerusalem behind bulletproof glass, okay? But it sits there for people to recognize it's coming. The temple is coming. There's two main groups, the Temple Institute and the Temple Mount Faithful. These are all the implements from the Temple Institute, and you can see they have a mock-up of a model of what they believe what they can build the temple. They're ready. It's just a matter of, they just need the permission. And in fact, the building itself, there's a couple different groups. One group says, hey, Solomon's temple took 7 years, so we want to take 7 years to build this temple. The others are like, no, we can't wait. We're going to do it as soon as possible. We're going to do it as soon as possible. Well, remember, back in Daniel 8, then I heard a holy one speaking. Another one holy one said, certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, 2,300 days. Then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. 2,300 days is basically 6 years and 140 days, okay? If you do biblical years, which are 360-day years, basically, from the time that the sacrifices start until the temple is cleansed is 2,300 days. That fits within a 7-year period. If the beginning of the period is permission to build, it gets a little bit technical, but they get from the time of permission to build to the actual sacrifices, they would have about 6.5 months to build the temple, which is plenty of time if they wanted to get the temple up, and between the temple being there and desecrated and cleansed when Messiah returns. Once again, a near and a future fulfillment as presented in the scriptures. Verse 15, then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when I came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. The vision is not just for Antiochus, who's 200 years away. No, this is the end times, 2,200 years, or 2,700 years away from now. This is what he's referring to. And I love it. The angels, basically, they understand that Daniel's not getting it, so he says, hey, Gabriel, explain it to him, will you? This is what he's saying. Here, make it make sense. And the next couple of verses, that's what he does. Daniel 8:18, in case you've missed what we've already talked about, he goes over it for you. Are you ready? One more time. Now, as he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and he stood me upright. And I said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time, the end shall be. The ram which you saw, having 2 horns, they're the kings of Media and Persia. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn is that between the eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of the nation, but not with its power. Remember that 4 kingdoms split apart? Verse 23, and in the latter times of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Wow. This is one bad dude who's rising up, and he's gaining control. He's suave. He's got all the skills, all the charisma, and yet in his heart he's just evil. Verse 25, through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Once again, he's lifting himself up. He's presenting himself. He eventually gets so full of himself that he says, look at me, I'm God. And he does that. You know, back in Caesar's day, they all considered themselves gods, right? Today, do we have gods? Oh, yeah. We don't call them gods, we call them goats. How many know what a goat is? I had to ask my kids. A goat is the greatest of all time. Tom Brady, he is a goat. Well, yeah, we do that, right? People are like, well, Tom Brady's amazing. But we have these people that we elevate to godhood status. We have a lot of gods. We don't call them gods. God's like, no. Where's your focus? Where's your focus? Well, it says that he shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. What's fascinating is every time somebody tries to destroy the Jewish people, you know what happens? They get a holiday. Yeah, I'm serious. Pharaoh tried to destroy the Jews. They get delivered. They get Passover. Okay? After that, Haman tried to destroy the Jews. What happened? They got delivered. Purim. Who's next? Antiochus Epiphanes tries to destroy the Jews. Hanukkah. It's true. Hitler tried to destroy the Jews, and they have, Yom HaShoah, the national, the day of the Holocaust. They also is the Israel's Independence Day. Actually, that was the ultimate holiday. Hitler tries to destroy the Jews, and 3 years later, the whole nation of Israel is given their own land that they haven't had for 2,000 years. Amazing. Fulfilling Bible prophecy to the day. We don't have time to go into that one today, but wow. We live in exciting times. And Jesus said in that Matthew 24, the generation that sees these things take place shall not pass away till they all get fulfilled. You and I are seeing these things take place. So it's like, it's happening. Verse 26, and the vision of the evenings and mornings which was told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward, I rose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. Remember, Daniel, he loves the Jewish people. He sees that the Jewish people are going to be, not destroyed, but severely oppressed. In Antiochus' day, 80,000 were murdered and 40,000 were enslaved when he got upset at them. It's just mind-blowing for this, what was going on. And Daniel is just overwhelmed. He's just, I can't handle it. Well, some of you then give me a timeline. Help me understand how this all fits together. And Revelation 6:1, I want to go to the Revelation 6:1 first, and then I'll give you the timeline. Revelation 6:1 begins the popping of the 7 seals. All right, Jesus is given, the Lamb is given this document, this title deed of the earth, and he begins to pop the seals in Revelation, and each seal is something that happens on the earth or in the heavens. Revelation 6, verse 1, now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. This white horse character is not Jesus Christ, it is the Antichrist. So this first seal is popped, the Antichrist comes on the scene. This corresponds directly to Matthew 24 when Jesus says, hey, many are going to come in my name, saying that they're the Christ, don't believe them. This is the Antichrist. This is what he says there in Matthew 24. That's the first thing that happens, is the Antichrist comes on the scene, this coming world leader. Remember, he's talked about in Daniel 7 and 8 as a little horn. He replaces the 10 kings. We don't know exactly when that sequence is going to happen, but we do know that it's also going to be tied to the temple and this 7-year treaty. Revelation 13 gives us another picture of this Antichrist character, of the satanic trinity. We looked at it a little bit last time. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Sounds like Greece. His feet were like the feet of a bear, like Persia. The mouth like the mouth of a lion, like Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound healed. This is part of the reason that some people believe that he was resurrected. Remember, just like Jesus was resurrected, the Antichrist copies it with a resurrection. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? In other words, who's going to get in his way? He's so smart. He has such wisdom. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Remember, we looked at it last time too, that there's 4 different ways that the period of the 7 years is broken up. 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, times, and half a time. All the same way to say 3.5 years. And so he's blaspheming for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. He's got a lot of power. Remember, we looked at it last week or 2 weeks ago. He's got as much power as Google. I'm serious. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Wow. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go to captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth and had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. He looks so benign. He looks so cute. Look at that little lamb. This false prophet, as he's called, he's really the press secretary for the Antichrist. He comes in and he's basically declaring, hey, he's selling everybody on the beast. Verse 12, he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword. Here's that. Make that image. Let's put it in the temple. In the sake of unity, we're going to bring all the faiths together, and we'll make this image to the beast because he stands for all of us. Right? Right? He stands for all of us. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and that image of the beast should speak and cause as many would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And we don't have time to go into it, but the whole AI thing we can create. We've created these lifelike robots, let alone the whole metaverse that's going on. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name, number 666. You know the rest of the story. Here's the deal. These 2 characters are rising on the scene, and they're controlling everything. Where do we go from here? What do we do with all this? The timeline is like, wait. You talked about all these different things, Ty, and I'm a little bit confused. So I want to put up a timeline to kind of to walk you through this to help you understand. So we're looking for, in the book of Revelations, in Revelation 6, it says that the first seal is the Antichrist coming on the scene, and we connect that with Daniel 9 and others, and it's the Antichrist establishes a 7-year covenant with Israel and other countries, probably, other Muslim countries, allowing the temple to be rebuilt. It'll take probably 6 months to get that temple rebuilt, and then sacrifices are going to be offered. Now, think about sacrifices. We're talking about killing animals. There's going to be a lot of people that are like, I don't want animals to get killed. That's not nice. Midway point through the tribulation, through that 7-year time period, the Antichrist is ruling, and we are all that are here undergoing the wrath of the Antichrist. Midway point, the Antichrist gets full of himself and basically sets up an image of himself, stops the sacrifice, and says, no more of this, we're going to worship me. That's the midway point. At that point, shortly after that, I don't know how the timing, is the rapture. If you're going through Revelation 6, what happens is all those seals happen, cataclysmic events, and then all of a sudden it says that Revelation 7 says, there appeared in heaven a great multitude. Okay, now think about it. All of a sudden in heaven there's this great multitude of people. That's really cool. That sounds like us. Sounds like us. That sounds like the rapture. There's this great multitude in heaven that no one can count. It says, where did they come from? They came from the tribulation. So if we take Revelation in order, it sounds like the rapture is literally in the middle part, somewhere in what we call pre-wrath, because we're taken out, and then the wrath of God is poured out on the rest of the planet to try to get the rest of the planet to repent. And that's the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments and all sorts of just awful stuff that we don't want to be here for. Now, some of you are pre-tribbers, which means that no, you're believing that Ty's wrong, and you're like, we're out of here before any of this happens. And I really hope that you're right, okay? Because that would be much better. But the Bible also says all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. We're going to face trials. If you live in Afghanistan right now, is it all hunky-dory? No. If you're a Christian, no. It is the worst place to be if you're a Christian. Second is North Korea, and down the list a little ways, not far, is China. Man, a lot of people are suffering. We got it easy. We have it easy. But that doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. So I hope that you're right. Dave and I, we strongly believe in this, what's called this pre-wrath rapture view, that we're going to go through some of this tribulation. Now, we could be wrong. Okay, we're not going to, we believe that if you believe in the pre-trib, that you're wrong, but we'll honestly say that we could be wrong too, okay? So we don't want to divide over this in our church. We don't want to make it a big deal, but I think it's fascinating to look at, when we look at the news headlines and we look at our Bible, the time is close. That's what's most important. And here's the other thing. Whether you're thinking that we're going to be here, that the rapture is not going to happen for at least, 4 years, if you don't think that's going to happen, you still don't know when you're going to breathe your last. There were 2 families here, not in our church, but 2 families in Palm Beach County that through no fault of their own entered eternity this week through drunk drivers or careless drivers. They weren't planning, they had plans for next week. They had plans for next month. And all of a sudden, car accident, family dead, gone. None of us knows. None of us knows. So we need to know that we're right with God. We need to know. 1 Thessalonians 5:9, for God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. We're not appointed for wrath. And that's part of that pre-wrath view, is that the wrath of God is all going to be poured out in the last little bit of the tribulation. We're not appointed for that. Just as God rescued Noah, he was not appointed for wrath. Just as God rescued the nation of Israel, and they were in the land of Goshen, and all the bad stuff was poured out in Egypt, but not on them. Just as God rescued Lot and took him out, God's going to rescue his church, and he's going to take us out. But now what do you do with that? 1 John 4, dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. Let me update that for you. Do not believe everything you watch on YouTube. Do not believe everything you hear in the news. You must test them to see if the spirit they have comes from God. For there are many false prophets in the world. This is how we know if they have the Spirit of God. If a person claiming to be a prophet acknowledges that Jesus Christ came in a real body, that person has the Spirit of God. But if someone claims to be a prophet and does not acknowledge the truth about Jesus, the person is not from God. Such a person has the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard is coming into the world and indeed is already here. But you belong to God, my dear children. You've already won a victory over the people, because the Spirit who lives in you is greater than the spirit who lives in the world. The spirit of Antichrist is out there, and the spirit of Antichrist wants to deceive you. The first thing it does, it wants to make you feel, it's not going to happen for a long time. What makes you think is, well, it's not that big a deal. I've got my fire insurance card that I signed. I signed on the dotted line. I turned my life over to Jesus. I've got the fire insurance. Really? Really? Are you really right with God? If you were to stand before God and he were to say, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? Well, my good outweighs my bad. Wrong answer. That's what a lot of people say. A lot of people that go to church say that. Well, I'm trying to be a good person, and my good's gonna there's no way that your good can outweigh your bad. God doesn't grade on a curve, he grades on a cross. 2 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm and hold fast to the teachings we passed on to you, whether by word of mouth or by letter. May our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us and by his grace gave us eternal encouragement and good hope, encourage your hearts and strengthen you in every good deed and word. That's where we end. That's the verse that we hang on to, that we come back to and saying, we see the time, we look at the calendar, it's like, wow, we're close. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's pray.